So 10 years ago, I was in grad school. And while I was in grad school for the 3 years I was there at Princeton, it was a pretty transformative time to be studying for seminary. At that point, I had never heard of the word eco-theology that we're talking about today. But I was following the news, and we had a lot of big news stories. There was President Obama's second election while I was there in seminary. We had Pope Watch for Pope Francis. And let me tell you, it was like the moon landing in a bunch of theology classes where we stopped to see what color the smoke was. There was the polity change in the Presbyterian Church USA that allowed queer ministers to lead and to be ordained. And that was the beginning of the split of the United Methodist Church while I was in seminary. Then we also had Hurricane Sandy that blew through Princeton. We had the Sandy Hook shooting in Connecticut, where I was a former school teacher, just a few miles up the road. Then Michael Brown's murder and the Ferguson uprisings as part of the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement. All of this happened while I was studying for whatever I was going to do with my life. And my seminary classmates around me, who were much more interested in working in churches at that point, which is a longer story, they were all grappling with how to make sense of all of this. With a death-dealing economy, with systems of injustice, with natural disasters, with gun violence. And one of the things that came out of this wrestling, this grappling, that I saw my classmates give themselves to was something called the Farminary. Started by someone who was an acquaintance, but who sought refuge out in nature and sought refuge in the soil. And so started a little community garden on some land that the seminary owned, and invited other students, invited residents of Princeton and Trenton to come and garden, and started building their own little economy, their own little veggie garden that eventually would supply both soup kitchens in Trenton and the seminary itself with food, and it taught students how to be, I don't remember the term you used, Mary Ellen, but halfway farmers, to stick our hands into the soil and to help things grow, which when you work with people in communities is kind of what we do, right? We're trying to help one another bloom and flourish. And so they created this Farminary, and it was based on eco-theology, this blend of ecology and theology that basically said, in Christian language, we see God in nature, right? We seek refuge out in the natural world. That the natural earth, Mother Earth, dear earth, is Scripture. It's sacred language, sacred knowledge. And that seeing God in the natural world was also about elevating the natural world to be on the same level as humanity, if not above humanity, right? Because often we think of ourselves as the top of the food chain, and that can lead to some problems. It was a small operation at first, and then it became a little bit bigger, a little bit more multiracial, a little bit more multi-faith and faith-rooted. But it was part of this emergent strategy in response to all of this, to do something, to create something, to grow something. And it followed the emergent strategy rule, like we read from Adrienne Marie Brown, that what you pay attention to grows. What you put your energy into grows. Eco-theology. In Unitarian Universalist language, we had the Transcendentalist. You may have heard of this big word. Walden Pond, Emerson Channing, all these people, getting back to nature, right? Seeing the sacredness of nature. That's part of our UU history and heritage, right? But not just in Transcendentalism. Depending on what faith tradition you come from, Jewish and Christian theologies from the book of Genesis talk about being good stewards of the earth, working in the Garden of Eden metaphor. The Islamic theology of someone like Sayyid Hossein Nasr called for a recalling of traditional spirituality alongside the hard sciences that Islam was so famous for, right? Great astronomers and mathematicians, but also wanting to recall that there is something sacred about the earth and that perhaps the ecological crisis that our earth is in, that recalling traditional spirituality might be part of the medicine for healing that crisis. For our pagan friends, those who practice earth-centered traditions, There is something called the Gaia model of the earth that sees the earth as one living organism or a system of ecosystems, mutually sustaining one another, working between the living and the non-living ecosystems. If you've never looked into that, it's very, very interesting, and we could do a whole nother sermon on the Gaia model. For those who are humanists, but with a slant towards social justice and reparations, the idea of moving from ownership of land towards being caretakers or stewards of land, that is part of a reparations model, a reparations lens. It also has roots in indigenous spirituality, moving from this dominion model where humans are supposed to own and dominate and be in dominion over the land, to being stewards, to being symbiotic, to being co-creators with earth. No matter which way you look at it, the wisdom of Robin Wall Kimmerer and Braden Sweetgrass speaks to us. Right? She writes of this indigenous idea of stewardship, of being brothers and sisters and siblings with the earth, and not being above anything. This work is anti-colonial, anti-capitalist, and part of what we often refer to as decolonization. It's a lot of big words, but what it comes down to is this. When we think about all of this, we might feel a need to just shut down and retreat. We might feel a need to rise up and fight. We might feel a need to run away, right? Fight, flight, or freeze are often our responses. The way to get out of this stuckness, as my friends in seminary found, one of the ways was to engage in eco-theology, to get back out into nature, to stick your hands in the earth. And that regardless of your faith system, regardless of your faith vocabulary, eco-theology is for everyone. That's what I want to try and convince you of. Not just for granola people like me, right? Not just if you drive a Prius, not just if you drive an electric vehicle, that there's something to be learned from this for all of us. And I mean that quite literally. Because there's a deep strain of eco-theology that runs through all major religions, and because relationship is at the heart of all of those. And we're big on relationship here. Relationships at the heart of our faith that are meant to be reciprocal. That word that scared me in math, reciprocal, means give and take, right? It's not a one-way street. It goes both ways. To be reciprocal means that your relationships are based on generosity and mutuality. Generosity and mutuality. Sharon spoke about our town hall that was organized here yesterday with Rep. Rabb and Senator Haywood. And it was so amazing to see the pews filled with all different kinds of people bringing their own slant on what they were worried about and what they were hopeful for, building community together. And what I was hearing from this town hall while I was working on this sermon was the time to full-blown panic is not right now. And it's very easy to respond to the panic of everything that's on the TV, everything that's on your social media feed. But what I was hearing was that now is the time to lean into community building and building alliances, building bridges, growing things. And the electeds were offering up, we're trying to find funding and money and resources to build things. Right? We had the food pantry present, we had Northwest Mutual Aid Food Services present. It was folks who were trying to quite literally feed people and build resources to build up community. And I was so inspired by that. What you pay attention to grows. And everything I was hearing was about generosity and mutuality, giving to people so that they can be nourished, either in food, right, or in encouragement, so that when it's time to do the actions, when it is time to fight, right, that you have what you need. The idea of building something from the ground up takes energy and resources, and a lot of times takes food. Those kinds of resources are what Robin Wall Kimmerer speaks to. It's what eco-theology is about. Seeing this life as a whole circle and knowing that you can't just do one thing and expect results, right? All of our systems are all interconnected. So if your response to all of this is simply to fight, 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 there can be a place for that. But it's not the only thing we need, right? That's how you burn out. And if your response is to hide or to freeze, that might be what you need, but it can't be the only thing, because that's called we give up, right? So, if eco-theology is part of our UU heritage, if it's multi-faith, if it's rooted in relationship, some might say covenant, why? What do I get out of it? I'm trying to convince you of this. What do I get out of it? Well, it is not just the moral superiority that I feel when recycling or planting trees or driving my electric vehicle, although that is nice. It is also about giving back, as Robin Wall Kimmerer says, giving back equally. Sometimes that requires some kind of sacrifice, giving of ourselves, but it is also about receiving something back. And what I've seen from the Farminary at Princeton Seminary, what I've seen from the emergent projects going on in UU world and around, what I've seen from the pantry and from the projects that we presented at the town hall, what I think we get back when we do some eco-theology is that we do build resistance and resilience. See if you agree. For resistance, it is both building up our actual bodily resistance, nourishing ourselves with good food, with companionship, with partners. Food justice is a very important part of kind of the resistance with a big R, as we say, make sure that people have enough to eat. But it's also resistance to despair, fear, apathy, overwhelm is a word I've heard a lot, and a word that I've felt a lot. And that doing something like planting a garden and doing eco-theology is resistance to those feelings. One of the saints, whose name I can't recall right now, was asked what he would do if he knew the world was ending tomorrow. His response was, I would plant an apple tree. Working on the world you may not see. If you were here before I was on sabbatical, which feels like last year, it may not have been last year, we spoke about Jesse Owens, famous U.S. athlete who competed in the U.S. Olympics over in Nazi Germany, and who came back with oak trees as symbols of his gold medals. And he planted those oak trees in the ground, not knowing then that that was a defiant act against the racism of Nazi Germany and the racism of 1930s America, and that those oak trees would grow in districts in Cleveland that would go on to be redlined and would become some of the only green spaces in those redlined neighborhoods, and that the growing of trees, as we have learned since then, contributes to all kinds of wonderful health outcomes. It lowers the temperature on the streets. It lowers the cortisol levels in people who are around the trees. It provides better air quality, all of these things. Doing eco-theology builds resistance and builds resilience, because it can also be a community-building activity. If you were out there when we were hauling wood around and hauling bags of soil and mulch and getting sweaty together, it was really fun. And it was a great community-building activity, not only because we brought cookies, but doing those things together, giving and taking in this covenant of reciprocity. That's building community. That's building beloved community. And as Robin Wall Kimmerer talks, that is how we heal ourselves. God, that sounds so Texan. Hang on, let me try that again. That is how we heal. Woo! That is how we make ourselves better. Healing the earth heals us, quite literally. Not just in terms of our relationships, but our physical bodies. There is a multifaceted study that looked at doing community garden and other kinds of eco-theology. This is what it said. Multiple biopsychosocial factors may account for a direct or indirect positive impact of gardening activities on well-being, quality of life, and health status. For some people, gardening activities led to adoption of healthy behavioral practices, increased fruit and veggie consumption, physical activity, and a positive impact on several aspects of mental health and well-being. Proximity to nature infuses feelings of connectedness with nature that promote positive affect, lift mood, decrease cortisol, and increase feelings of tranquility. It provides an opportunity for greater community cohesion and social connectedness, increasing one's network of social support. It also lowers risk for vascular diseases, type 2 diabetes, cancer, and heart disease. They looked at something like more than 50 studies to do meta-analysis, and they found that universally, when we stick our hands in the ground, it's good for us. It heals us, quite literally. When my 2 children are feeling overwhelmed by all of this, we do some eco-theology. In toddler language, the way to deal with anxiety, anger, despair, brokenness, that can be overcome and healed with 2 very simple steps. Give them a snack and take them outside. That's the baseline for what I'm trying to convince you of. That is not just us that need a snack and to be taken outside. That is also our systems, right, that can be healed this way. Having more people stick our hands in the earth, lower our stress levels, improve our air quality by planting trees, improve our mental health, engaging in this cycle of reciprocity, giving back to the earth that gives us what Robin Wall Kimmerer calls the privilege of breath. The privilege of breath. What do we do with those breaths? She writes, each of us comes from a people who were once indigenous, and we can reclaim our membership in the cultures of gratitude that formed our old relationships with the living earth. Gratitude is a powerful antidote to what ails us. A deep awareness of the gifts of the earth and of each other is medicine. Generosity and mutuality. When you give, you get back, friends. We talk about being healed, being made more whole, nurturing wholeness here. I believe that we are healed by our relationships when we work to heal those relationships. When we have a snack and we go outside and do something together, that is medicine. That's the whole basis of eco-theology, that it is a spiritual act to be in nature and to be a part of nature, and that the practice of generosity begets generosity, of mutuality begets mutuality, that the more you give, the more you get back. And not only does it make you healthier and helps build community, it also makes you happy. When you go and stick your feet in the grass or get your hands dirty, ask my 2 children. They love nothing more than to stick their hands in the dirt and eat whatever it is that's on it. They're doing eco-theology in their own way, right? So here at UU Mount Airy, there are lots of ways to do it. It could be planting your own garden. It might be helping out with our burgeoning garden outside. It might be going out and just touching the grass, opening your window and being still, buying a basil plant from Trader Joe's and naming her and growing her and talking to her, taking a walk in the Wissahickon, or simply finding a way to do your own little bit of eco-theology, to build resistance and resilience to all of this. Because what you pay attention to grows. And what you pay attention to that grows blooms. And when one thing blooms, the rest of us can bloom too. May that be so for us.